I loved Astra's little tail in there for a
I know.
second.
She heard you, I think, and then decided she was going to join.
I love that she's my little friend and she wants to come say hi whenever we're live.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, welcome back, my friends. We are here with another episode of. Oh, I need to mute my computer. One moment. There
Oh.
we go. I have my. It's been a tech crazy day, friends. We were just
Yeah.
talking before we went live. For those of you who are energy sensitive out there, you may be having all kinds of tech distortions right now because the collective energy has been wild. So, yes, hopefully my tech is all managed now. And welcome back to another episode of the Inner Tapestry Series, where Red and I talk about all things multidimensional blueprint, cosmic energies, timelines, all that fun, wild stuff. So,
Absolutely. My name is Red MoonEagle. I'm the psychic catalyst. I'm a teacher healer, and I love to talk about this subject. It is all of the subjects that we talk about. The connection of the spirit that is living in the meat suit experience and how we interface with that meat suit experience. That's like my hot topic.
yeah. So today we're going to be getting into a topic that I know so many people are really curious about, which is multidimensionality, right? The
Oh yeah.
the other worlds and the realms and the 3D and the 5D and what does it all mean, right?
Yeah.
And this is something that I see all the time. And okay, I want to A, go back and introduce myself. I'm just so excited. But B, I want to do a very important caveat on our program that I always try to remember to say, which is that we're going to share our thoughts, opinions, downloads, understandings, etc. And they might not land for you, and that's okay. But I see a lot of stuff out there that is like so wildly inaccurate and so in the fear shame paradigm,
Mhm.
and I want to really bust those sorts of things. But again, opinions. So I am Safrianna, the Queer Spirit Guide. I help leaders step into the power of their blueprints so they can lead with authenticity and actually have an iconic impact in the world instead of silencing themselves and keeping themselves small. And
Yeah.
we do that by facing the shadows and looking at the real meat of who we are. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So let's talk about
Oh yeah.
multi-dimensions. I want to start with anchoring into what I was referring to when I said, like, sometimes I see very wildly inaccurate information out there. Um,
Yeah.
I very much interface with the woo spaces online, the spiritual spaces online, and people talking about New Earth and the 17th dimension and like all of these very big, expansive things
Mhm.
that I'm like, okay, there are shreds of real truth to this.
Yeah.
And a whole lot of it is baloney that ends up guilting and shaming people into feeling less than or not good
Oh
enough
yeah.
because they're not at this level of understanding. So it's just kind of ick. So
Yeah.
I want to get into the real
Yeah.
conversation. So
I think the thing about the spiral or the dimensional spiral, I have always had it described to me the same way by every guide I have ever had contact with. So since I was small, right? Like I've read fiction. My dad was a big science fiction person, and he'd give me these books that were like, whoa, and I'd go, oh, that's not real, or oh, this is a thing, and my dad would always go like, okay, it's all fantasy, yeah, but right, like even he couldn't perceive the things that my guides were telling me all of the time. And one of the things that I think people get caught up in, and this is very much that shadow, and it's reinforced by our society, which is um, I get to a place, then I am ahead of, or I am advanced of, or I'm more than, better, I have no better way of describing it, than someone else. And within the spiral, there is no better than, more than at all. Between the dimensions, whether you're in the eighth dimension or you're in the third dimension, nobody's ahead of anybody else. There is no like quantifier of more or better or advanced or whatever. Like we think of our world as third world country, fourth world country, first world country. What the hell does I never have understood any of those things. They don't make any sense to me. We are all spiritual entities running around in meat suits. We all need the same thing. And dimensional conversations in the woo woo spaces really very much say, well, wear this magical talisman and it's going to raise your 25th dimension of consciousness of a thing and you're going to never experience anything bad or whatever it is. And I really want people to stop, really stop when you hear things like that and go, okay, where am I? Where did that trigger? Where's my fear? Where's my shame? Where's my disappointment? Where's my shadow? And why am I buying into that to buy into that shadow place?
Right.
Because dimensionally there is it's back to that infinite symbol we talked about before, the shadow and the light of experiential experiences, physiologically, mentally, emotionally, communally, right? And this communal dialogue of multidimensional awareness, enlightenment, higher than vibration
Mm-hmm.
does not and will not, and I have never seen anybody use it in any other way other than to control in some of those woo woo spaces. And this is one of the things that I'm so passionate about doing these podcasts with you, Safriana, is that we talk about that. We talk about making sure that people are aware you can be real with this and not get caught up in somebody taking power over you, making you feel ashamed or um, feeling like you have to become a pretzel to diminish the other part of yourself to be a higher consciousness, fifth dimensional being bullshit.
Yeah,
Just
it
kidding.
drives me bonkers because it's this hierarchical, you've got to get ahead. It is literally us versus them mentality that we see
Yeah.
on a dominant political scale be
Yep.
and capitalistic scale being applied into spiritual hierarchy, and
Yeah.
not here for it at all. We're
No.
all existing here on the 3D together in our
Yeah.
tangible meat suits.
Hmm.
And so we all have that shared experience. And some of us, go check out the frequencies episode if you want lots more details on that. But a majority of us do have access and awareness of a fifth dimensional space, a spiritual realm,
Yeah.
but not all humans. But most of us do understand there is something happening between 3D and 5D and something in between.
Yeah.
So that's where we can start to orient. And then I would love to kind of actually go all the way up to the top. So one of the things that you said recently that what I love about talking with Red, as an indigo frequency person and a sacral responder, is that when Red says information to me, I go, "Oh yeah," or "Wait a minute," like it either pings, "Oh yeah, right," or "Huh, I need more information," and
Yeah.
so I'm always
Absolutely.
getting new information that just reminds
Hmm.
me I remember. And so when Red recently shared at the end of our last episode, which is why we're talking about the spiral today, that the spiral only went up to a ninth dimension, I was like, yeah, actually, that lands for me.
Yep.
And now I want to hear more. So
Right.
starting from, we know 3D and most of us know 5D, that spiritual dimension that we access where we talk to our guides or we
Hmm.
meditate or even experience our emotions. Okay, we know that.
Uh-huh.
But what about that top down? Can we actually look at the
Uh,
ninth to compare, and then we'll get into the
okay.
nitty gritty?
So I'm going to caveat all of this with a reality check, which is I am living in a 3D, 4D, 5D space. We all are. We're all having the potentiality to move into that fifth dimensional place. So I have to start from an orientation, and I love how you oriented that, Safrian. I'm just going to add one little caveat to that, which is that shadow light journey is that fourth dimensional space, and we need to let go of the idea that that is time
Mm-hmm.
because that is not quite accurate. And we're moving into that fifth dimensional awareness. And there are people who due to vibration, due to their blueprint, due to maybe the people around them are already kind of stepping into that fourth and fifth dimensional space, they're having these very real, very, very real, tangible, life changing experiences where they are getting glimpses of that fifth dimension, but they are being forced to live through that fourth dimensional space. And that's very uncomfortable. It's topsy turvy. It's ass over tea kettle. It is chaos personified, okay, seemingly. And I'm going to say seemingly because I have more information, okay? Now, because it's uncomfortable, terrifying, talk about shadow journey, like, holy moly, it is very easy to think that if you're just positive and you stick to that spiritual bypassing and that toxic positivity, you'll get through that fourth dimensional stuff faster and you'll be able to be in the 5D and do all of these things that the 5D predictions are saying. Okay. Um, well, universe is going to not let you do that.
Yeah.
There are rules. Don't ask me what all of them are because I'm still learning them too. I'm in a meat suit as well. So I came in and forgot a whole bunch of stuff and I'm trying to remember just like everybody else. So when we're talking about that 9D, one of the things that I learned very early is that there are things in the spiral that my guides to this day go, remember you have a pimple head. If I gave you too much, your brain would go poof. And it's probably a terrible analogy, and people are like, oh, that's gross. But as someone who I had to train myself very much to, oh my God, I swear to God,
It does this every time you talk about big. Maybe it's the word explosion. I don't
maybe,
know.
I don't know. Um,
Dramatic
so
timing, though.
it is dramatic technique and not intentional. So the 90 is, think of like we have entities that we can have interfaces with them that have a piece of themselves who have come into a human meat suit. So there are entities that when they come into a human meat suit, they're so different, for lack of a better word, that they will shard themselves to come into a meat suit experience. But they live, the whole rest of themselves is somewhere else. We can't really perceive what that is. And there are entities that, I don't know, guard the doorway, I guess. You know, for a long time, I tried to use the example of it's like a maze. You come into the maze with your soul group and you leave the maze, you leave the gauntlet with your soul group. And what's in between is this spiral that is both up and down. It is a two-way spiral. So it's kind of like having two funnels that are connected by this central pin, I don't know, point. And that's that 1D. That 1D is that pinpoint, and you can be anywhere in that spiral. So when people are like, what's at the top? I'm like, well, it's kind of the top and the bottom, kind of depending on how you look at it. And it's constantly moving, and I don't really know how to explain it, but it's like a woven piece of cloth, and every single one of those intersections is like a piece of a junction. And the 9D is being a 9D entity is aware that there is something outside of the 90. Now we can fantasize about it, we can think that we can understand it, but unless we are anchored somewhere in the 8 or 90 ourselves, we're not really going to understand that from a 3D perspective. We can talk about it, we can make up words, we can create these wonderful graphs, we can do mathematical formulas out the wazoo. We're not going to get there. We cannot get there from here. It's like telling somebody to walk to England. You get to the edge of the ocean and they're like, I cannot get here from there. There is water in the way. You have 6 other dimensions between here and 9. So it's really hard for people to be humble enough to understand that they can't get there. I can't get there. My guides tell me all the time, okay, here's a piece of the thing. And then I go, oh God, what am I going to do with that? That doesn't match anything else. And they're like, of course not. Of course it doesn't match. You're missing like a whole other thing. And I'm
You're
like,
missing 99.999 repeating percent of the equation, probably.
yes.
Yeah.
And one of the things my guides warned me of very early in my life, which made it very hard for many years to do readings with people, to work in this field as a professional, which is they would say, well, that's not a thing. And I go, well, how do I explain that? They're like, oh, you can't. And you're just going to have to be okay with that. And I'm like, ah. And not because I was upset by that, but because I want to help people. That's why I am who I am in this world. So when we talk about ninth dimensional stuff, there is a there is a real need for people to be humble in the knowledge they are not going to get it. And I don't care how advanced your soul is. And I've met some amazing people, and there's so many wonderful healers and helpers in this community, and they really want to help, but there's no 24th dimension you can access from here. There isn't. You cannot get here from there. You have to, with as a soul group, from what I understand, your soul group has to leave the spiral to get where you want to go.
Yeah, so that's an interesting concept too. Soul groups. We haven't talked a lot about it, but it's part of this spiral story.
Yes.
So from I'm
And it's your
gonna
story. It's your story. It's everyone's story. Everybody has a soul group,
yeah,
minus a few exceptions, and that's a whole different thing we won't get to.
right. So soul groups, the way I theorize it is there was nothing, aka there was unity, and then there was
Mm-hmm.
division,
Mm-hmm.
and chunks of unity broke apart to go do their thing. So soul groups are like these
Sure.
big chunks of that energy in the
Yeah.
spiral,
Mm-hmm.
going through the journey of trying to reunite back with themselves as a soul group,
Mm-hmm.
and then with the whole, the divine, the
Whatever's
creator,
outside the ninth
that
dimension,
exists
whatever's out
something
there,
outside of the ninth
right?
dimension, something
Whatever
that
that
we
is,
can't even begin to theorize.
right?
um so when most people are doing spiritual work, they're really accessing 5D, accessing 6D messages from
Maybe,
guides,
maybe
accessing, we talked about librarians, which exist ninth, eighth. Is, am I remembering that?
it's ninth
It's
D,
ninth, but they disseminate the information downward, sort of.
upwards and downwards. It kind of
Yeah,
depends on what kind of librarian they are, and that's a whole different. I do not know how to explain all this where it makes sense sometimes.
yeah.
It sounds like I'm being contradictory, but my guides are like, oh, wait, you don't have this. And I'm like, but that doesn't match anything.
hmm So we'll start from the bottom. So 1D is this pinpoint,
Yeah.
which just to me says point of existence, a single.
It's very interesting. When I started doing a lot of theosophy work, right? Like I was a teenager and I was exploring all the religions. I mean, I was really diving into the bottom of the barrel. Talk about autistic special interest. Wish I'd known that about myself at that time. Like all I ever wanted to talk about was theosophy. That's it. That's all I wanted to talk about. And I remember being really frustrated at some point, and I got myself cornered into an office with a Catholic priest. It was fascinating. It was fascinating. Reminded me of my dad actually a lot. A really nice guy. And I kept asking this question about, well, why do you keep saying God is a man? Right? Like I was really obsessed with that at that time. And they were like, well, men are dominant and men are this. I heard all kinds of answers, right? And he said, well, how about I phrase it differently for you? And I went, I would love that, please. And it was the first religious person I had encountered in person who had said, instead of thinking about God as a man or a woman, think of God, a Godhead, or an entity of divinity as the universe divine. And I went, Okay, what do you mean by that? Because I know a lot about the Catholic religion, and that is not jiving really well. Right? Like, that doesn't sound like your theosophy. It doesn't sound like the things that I have read and the things I have learned. And he kind of grinned at me and he goes, well, I might be a little rogue in my own way, you know. And over the next year, we had these amazing conversations. But basically, he pointed out, he said, it is source point. And it was when he said source point, that's when all of my guides rang all the bells and whistles about the first dimension.
Yeah.
First dimension is what, from our perspective as 3D entities, when we're talking about source coming into manifestation, we are talking about source point, and source point is the first dimension. It is a moment, it is a point, it is a infinite time and space, whatever you want to call it, because at the end of the ninth dimension, say you want to leave, you still have to come back through the spiral to source point to leave. We come in and we exit through source point. The first dimension is essential for going, and I use that word loosely, going anywhere.
That makes sense.
Okay?
That
So when
that
people
makes
talk
sense.
about where does life begin, source point.
Hmm.
All life, sentient consciousness coming into whatever dimension they're coming into, has a source point. And it's a very movie target, by the way.
Well, yeah, that can exist anywhere
Yeah,
in this. It's literally moving. And I've always
yes,
had this, I call it God particle. It's like that
yes.
the void point is source
Mm-hmm.
point. It's when you get down to quote unquote nothingness and there is just this connection between God, divine, conscious
Whatever.
something
Yeah,
and this,
yes.
whatever this is here.
Whatever this is. Yeah.
So yeah, that makes total sense for 1D. So then 2D
Mm-hmm.
is
So 2D is more along the lines of, if we're thinking of 4D, kind of the bridge to 5D, it's kind of the same thing, where 2D is the bridge into the 3D manifestation. There are 2D entities, and those entities are often considered like, I don't know how to explain it. They're considered like, I don't know, you might could call them ghosts. They're like in between. Like they are not, they've not chosen to go through source point, but they are not within the 3D 4D realm either. They're kind of halfway. When people talk about like dying, right? I'm dying and I'm seeing the light, and I've heard so many psychics talk, especially mediums. I love listening to mediums because I'm like, yep, that's 2D. Yep, that's 2D. Yep, that's 2D. Because it's very interesting. I ignore a lot of the 2D because it's not useful to me. Those are entities that are caught between. They just haven't decided to go connect back through to who they are as entities within the spiral. They have chosen to stay in the in between place. But the in between place is a very busy place too, because that 2D is kind of like source point, it's moving around. It exists at the same time that 3D exists. So if it's a very different idea than your, so we've talked about blueprints before, right? Like your guides, your primary guides kind of have to come into harmonic a little bit with where you are in the 3D, but they're not with us. But they're very aware that that 2D exists, but they're not in the 2D. Okay. So when you're getting glimpses of your guides, or you're getting glimpses of these other entities, they're somewhere in the 4D, 5D, 6D, whatever, right? That 2D is a different kind of in between. It's kind of like getting off your blueprint. So those null voids we talked about where they're beside themselves, that's where you're beside yourself at. Like it's residing in the 2D. That's why some of us can be very aware of it.
Mm.
Like we get the icky feeling, they're not in themselves, there's this whole awareness. And the 2D is very electrified, for lack of a better term. It is full of stuff.
Yeah, I'm
It's
just thinking
very,
like energy charge. Like it's
yeah,
got a
it's very
density to it.
charged. It is very dense. It's kind of like, I use the analogy all the time. It's like molasses in the wintertime. It is sticky, it's thick, but yet it's busy. It's very active, and it's not a comfortable place for those that are in a 3D existence. We can be aware of these things, but we would be very uncomfortable if we tried to squish ourselves down into that space, because not, it doesn't, we can't hold ourselves there. And that's actually a really good example of trying to explain how like a 90 would interface with us. Like, I'm just going to be aware that 2D is there. I'm going to acknowledge it, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, because that's like trying to squeeze all of me into a space that's already full of a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's the same thing with a 90 entity giving us just a little piece of themselves, because they can't fit all of them into here
Yeah.
now.
Well, the 3D gift wrap. They
Yeah.
can't fit it all in
Yeah.
the gift wrap. So they
No,
don't
yeah,
try.
they can't. And that's why when I talk to people about like who they are, who's their true form, like what are they as an entity, and I talk very much about, you're this big, you're this vast, quantumly connected, multidimensional entity, and you're trying to squeeze yourself into a blueprint that then squeezes yourself through the eye of the needle, aka meat suit, because it's very I mean, even entities that are from Earth or from the Four Sisters, I don't know. I don't know anybody that isn't quantumly connected to the spiral in some way, because we all have soul groups, and our soul
Right.
groups are so aware of all of the everything all of the same time stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know if it'll make sense to everyone else, but I can't speak for anyone else. But
I
this,
don't know if you have better questions to help
yeah.
me
So
clarify.
again, 1D is the point of the source point, the
It's
God
source point.
particle, the void
Yeah.
that we thread through to have an
Yeah.
existence in the spiral.
Yep.
2D is this dense, heavy, ephemeral space that is not attached to sentient decision making type stuff is what I'm getting. It's like up in 3D and beyond, like we start to kind of choose what we're doing with the energy, whereas
Well,
2D sounds like it's just energy.
there's a lot of entities that started true form in 2D, and I have met them. They're fascinating. But because they're so far along in the spiral, or they have guides that are kind of very active, you would very, I think it would be very challenging for people to sense that they're any different than anybody else. But their true forms look very different. Their density of true form is a totally different thing. And talk about electrically charged. Like I would say that that's usually my first clue when I meet them before I like look at who they are, is that charge. There is a charge there, and a differentness. So there are entities that are from that space,
Okay.
but it is, if we want to look at time as a linear thing, which it is not, but if this helps people conceptualize it, think of the Big Bang, and they existed for 5 seconds. That's the 2D. That's where they came from.
Hmm. Yeah. I just as I'm tuning it is this like it's mass energy. It is
Yeah.
energy in like a pure sense, and an entity could absolutely
Yes.
draw through that pure
Yes.
energy. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. So 3D is where we start to see, well, where we
Yes.
see the body, the physical,
Yes.
like there is a form that takes a tangible body on, and
Well, it's where we like to think as humans that we're individual. So individuality is the 3D,
That makes sense. Yep.
where we think of sentient consciousness. Astra is a separate entity from me. You are a separate entity from me. That plant is a separate entity from me. Okay? That's 3D.
Mhm.
4D is you and I are the same. We have emotions, we have connections, we can recognize as spiritual entities that we are the same, that we're in the spiral together.
Mhm.
Okay? 5D is we are not only all the same, but we all have the same goals and we can't do it alone.
Mhm.
We literally cannot do it alone,
Right.
right? 6D is taking all of that awareness, all of the I am my own person, but I am not you. You and I are the same, and we have to do it together. And 60 is the melting pot of the spiral of fucking chaos. And I don't really have a better word of explaining that because it is an experience of, I think probably the best way I had a guide tell me many, many years ago, and this was when I was very young. So I think it was because I had read the science fiction book. I was very confused. I was like, I should be able to do the things in this book. Like I had this awareness that this is real. Why can't I do it here? Like I knew that here was different than there, but I didn't have a way to explain that to my parents. I couldn't explain it to my friends. I sounded like a crazy person and I was aware that I couldn't figure out how to get them to understand that this is a real thing, but we just can't do it here. And I don't know why. And it doesn't make sense. And I think I feel like I need to fix that, but then aware that I can't fix that. And then I'm just mad about it. I mean, I was mad about it for like 10 years. I was mad about it. But, and I still get a little frustrated sometimes, I admit. But my guides explained it to me in the way that where people think, because there's been some interesting stories, like fiction stories written that I'm like, oh, I think somebody's finally getting a clue. Somebody's guides are like helping them understand this, which is the rules are different here, but the rules there in the 6D are where magic can happen.
Mhm.
They are where telepathy is a thing. They are where that sixth dimensional awareness is where you take all of that stuff from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and now you're experiencing it all. And I think that's where people get confused in the 3D, which is, oh, this is the lesson, this is the hard place, this is where we are here to work through all of our karma and all of our shit. Well, actually, just FYI, six dimensions a bit messier.
Yeah, it's to me it's that everything everywhere all at once intersection where there is still, tell me if I'm wrong in this, I'm getting that there is still a sense of individuality melded with the knowingness of all, which lets there be this workshop, this playground
Yes.
in which there is still chaos.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Absolute chaos.
And it's so full of action. I was listening to an audiobook the other day and I had to turn it off because for a hot minute, I was in this very odd felt sense. My body was reacting to things. I had to turn it off and I, went and put my feet on the ground, got my earth suit, meat suit back grounded. And I went, what the hell, guys? Okay, what the hell was that? And they were like, oh, you just tapped in too tight to the story because that's a memory story. And I went, so this actually occurred, right? I'm getting clarity. This actually occurred. And he went, yeah. And the fiction book, and I'm not going to tell everybody on the podcast what it was, but it's an intergalactic war, basically. And the character in the story connected back to the 3D in a memory in the story. And I had this overall body, like visceral response. It wasn't bad, but it was definitely like in that moment going, okay, I need to go find somewhere to breathe because this is way too shifty stuff. So 60 is very much where, if you want to think about intergalactic wars and
That
Star
was
Wars
literally
and
going to be my next
Avatar
question.
and like all the things that people find this commonality of understanding and felt sense of this, we are pretty sure it's real. And you may be having these memory bleed throughs. There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Okay. And you could have somebody in your soul group sitting right there in the 60, just waiting for you to get out of the 3D and join them back in the 60. I mean, I've seen guides tell me, I've had guides tell me that about people's blueprints. Like, this is our lives here. If you think of like 100 years of this life, that's like to age 5 in the 60.
Yeah.
So you can take a break and go do something else in the spiral and then go back type thing. So it's again, there's no one ahead of anyone else ever. Now, does that answer that question, that 60 question?
I think so. Yeah, because my follow-up question until you said it was going to be, so when, again, I interface a lot with the woo community, and there are a
Oh yeah.
lot of intuitives that are picking up on galactic wars
Yes.
and, things. And every time I tune in, I'm like, it's not in this
Mm-mm.
dimension though.
No.
And it's always felt like it's
Somewhere else.
overlaid, but somewhere
Yep.
else, because the spiral is all
Yes.
it's all sourced through that 1D, so it's all
Yes.
a solid plane and this three-dimensional,
Yes.
multi-dimensional shape,
Yes.
pathway, whatever. So yeah, I think that answers it, and I think that a lot of people, you're like, we're onto something there. I think so many intuitive people are accessing 60 stuff,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's like
It's screwing with them. It really is
overwhelming.
screwing with them.
Yeah.
And I've had my own fair share of these since I was a kid. Like, I mean, from a very early age. Like, when my friends were apparently worried about what Barbie doll clothes their Barbies were going to wear, I'm worried about how to understand why I can't access the other part of myself that should be able to do something.
Yeah.
Like, I'm worried about it. I am concerned that I will not be able to do my work because I don't have all the tools.
Right.
Like, I am truly worried and concerned about it. And it took a long time to let that go. And if you are an entity that has worked through a lot of the 3D, like intergenerational trauma, you've been working through the shadow and light, you have doing the active cellular healing forward and backwards within your own family line, which requires access to the 4D and acknowledgement of the 4D existence within that journey,
Mm-hmm.
you will continue to get glimpses of that 5D. And that 5D glimpse will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And your access to that becomes part of your consciousness in what we think of as the 3D existence. And when people are talking about the new earth, they're really you cannot leave, oh my God, you cannot leave your 3D body behind to go to the 5D. Part of 60 is body. Where the fuck do you think they're coming from? I mean, that's been my ongoing question for a long time. Okay, we're going to send to 5D. Where the fuck is the body going to come from? 60? 70?
So that's an interesting question too, is where, which dimensions of the spiral do have bodies as we know of them, our human understanding of bodies. So
All the
60
way through.
all the way through.
All the way through.
All the way through. Cool.
All the way through. There are bodies all the way through. That's why true form is so hard for people to get in their head. They're like, oh, I'm an ascended being, a light beam. You can be a light beam, but that is a true form. It has substance. It's a beam.
Yeah, that's okay. Because everything that comes into the spiral has an original true form.
Yes, everything has a form. You have to come through source point,
Yeah. So, 70.
right? So 70 is kind of where it gets messy, seventh and eighth D, because I truly believe my guides when they say you're getting into the place where your human mind really starts to struggle with making this make sense. Okay.
Yeah, 60 makes
We
total sense. So I'm like, cool.
we can
But
get 60 because so many of us are already 5D.
mhm.
And I say us because there's a lot of 5D people.
Yeah.
A lot. And a lot more than you think. Okay. There's also a lot of 3D, 4D struggle buses too, but there's a lot of 5D people. There really are. So 60 makes sense. 70 is where we start to really lose our anchoring because we aren't in 60. None of us are in 60 yet. So 70 starts to, I mean, 70 really starts to fuck with you a little bit. So think of 70 as you're going through the spiral, and this is why I like the spiral analogy of, if you think of a funnel, right? And the water goes down in the funnel, there's a journey between each D level,
Mhm.
dimensional level, right? So you go around the spiral and you're like, oh, I see a picture. And then my hand disappears in the camera. And then, oh, you see a little bit of it. And my hand disappears out of the camera. And then, oh, you see a little bit of it. So that's kind of where you're getting glimpses until you're here and you see all of the hands, right? So in the 70, we get little glimpses of it when we think of like angels. When people really like, I'm talking to the Gabriel, Michael, Angelo, Seraphina, Celestial, whatever the thing is. I don't ask me. I'm obviously not an angel person. I don't speak that language because it's so limiting.
Because there's
um,
so much more than just
oh,
angelic
oh
entities.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. I abandoned the angel conversation about 20 years ago because I went, and then I keep meeting more, and none of the books talk about anybody else. So I should probably just abandon that. And the 7D is kind of where you start to, if you can think of an entity that comes into a space that you cannot perceive the largeness, the vibrational frequency of, but there's still form, and the form is so big, so vast, your emotional capacity in this meat suit gets overwhelmed by. Immediately overwhelmed by pure love, no fear, no shadow. It seems as though, and I'm going to use that word deliberately, seems as though there is no shadow.
Mm.
Okay? 7D is the basically what most people think of what heaven would be, what angels come from. Like there is no shadow. It's not really that there is no shadow, but it's very much like if you are the person who has a glass table and you've got a fish tank underneath it and you're looking through the top of the fish tank down into, and you can see the little snails crawling along the gravel at the bottom, and you can see the gravel at the bottom. Like that's our perception of what's up above us. It's a big thing. And it's just all light and love, because the edge, once you start getting closer to the edges of the spiral, the less shadow you can perceive.
Mhm. Yes.
Okay. So 70 has form. We have a lot of helpers in 7D. There's a lot of entities that come into that 7D space to do a lot of work in the 60 space, really. Many years ago, I ran across a very, very short story. Never have found the author write this anywhere else, but it was a very, very short story about this woman who did magic, right? And her invisible friend would come in and go grab the end of the wand and go, "Nope, you can't do that. That's not allowed." And they would have these long discussions about things in the story. It wasn't very long. I mean, it was a very short story, but at the very end of the short story, it was, why can't anybody else see you? Basically, was the question. And this entity goes, well, they can. All they have to do is step into the seventh awareness, and that was the end of the story.
And you were like,
And I
yes, trying to
remember
tell me
going,
everything.
"Oh my god, that's like the best description ever. Where is this author? Where is this story?" I think I read it in like fifth grade or something. It was a very long time ago. So there is this thing about seventh dimensional entities, and we actually have them in our guide teams here in the third dimension a fair amount. If you like pass out, if you pass away, you leave this meat suit. A lot of entities, if they don't want to come into 3D again, they just want to help out, they'll do 7D manifestations to kind of be guides for 3D, 4D, 5D, whatever. Okay. Um, and 7D is also kind of like, it's kind of like going to high school for 8D.
Okay.
So you got to kind of do some homework, and you got to clean your room, and you get your driver's license. You know, I got to do some stuff before you can adult, right? That's kind of what 7D is. It's not as chaotic as 6D. It's actually very calm. It can, to a human 3D meat suit experience, it can feel like heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Angels are singing and beautiful palaces and everything's perfect and there is no shadow. That's kind of 70. There is shadow. That's where your homework comes in. That's where you're getting your driver's license. But it's not chaotic. Like 60 is somewhat chaos comparatively. And then, does that explain 70?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm just noticing, so I have ever since that form question, right? There is a physicality to, or a form to, every dimension.
Yes.
And there is a non-physical form to every dimension. There's that
Yes.
energetic, spiritual, perceptive overlay and
Yes.
some form of what we would think of as physical dimensionality. And
Yeah.
so human experiences, we're in a 3D meat suit, but we are capable of having a 4D experience and a 5D experience, making us 3 to 5th
Yes.
dimensional beings. So there's
Yes.
these chunks. I just wanted to like kind of circle back real quick that there
Yeah.
are these chunks of dimensions where entities kind of overlap, like they're in a
Yes.
spectrum from 1 to 9, and
Yeah.
they might be 3 to 5, they might be 6
Yeah.
to 8, or 6 to
Yeah.
7. They have these like
Yeah.
spectrum chunks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the body in our reality appears to be routed in 3-dimensional, but we're
Yeah.
experiencing 4D, 5D. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
say that because I get that, but I was like, I know someone out there is like, wait, what?
What? Yeah.
So yes, yes.
Yeah. So 70 is interesting. We do have people that have interface with 7D entities all the time, but they do kind of come through as what, in a very simplistic form, someone would say, "My angel came to me." I'm like,
Mhm.
maybe they did, maybe they didn't, I don't know. You know, like, because guides can come through if you're really stuck in a 3D karmic space. Your guide, who's your best friend from another world and another space and time that is not an angel, could come across like an angel because they know you need that safety piece to make your human brain go, "Oh, I don't have to be stuck in this place," right?
Mm.
Like, our guides help us all the time. So just FYI, it doesn't mean your experiences are wrong. Okay. Don't ever want anybody to think that, but just understand that your perceptions do change. Mine have changed in the sense that my guides have said things and then not given me any more information. I'm like, that's all I have to go by. And then 10 years later, they're like, oh, here's your other piece of the puzzle. And I'm like, oh my God, like I said that wrong for 10 years because you wouldn't give me the other piece, right? Not because the core information was wrong, but because I didn't have all the picture pieces,
There
right?
was a
Like
bigger piece, yeah.
there's a bigger piece. And I think there's something valid about, for me anyway, I'm in my fifth decade, and it took me until the mid third and the mid fourth decade for some of this to be translatable in the world. Like the world had to get to a place where I didn't sound like I needed heavy medication and a padded cell.
Yeah. That's the tremendous thing that's happened, especially over the last 20 years, is
Yeah,
more acceptance for these kinds of conversations. It's all happening in divine timing, like it's
it is.
collectively designed, and we're right where we need to be.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and and there's more. So the eighth D is the part where one of my favorite experiences many years ago was reading a book by a famous psychic, and I'm not going to say their name, but they had in their first book that I read was kind of like an autobiography thing about how they came to be a famous psychic. And one of the conversations they had with their primary guide was very ironically, not ironic, similar to a conversation I had been having arguing with my primary guide since as far back as I could remember. And it was about this frustration about
uh-oh.
stuff.
All right, rewind that. It was this frustration about
Going to school. I went to school in this place within the dimensions to prepare to be here. And I spent so much time trying to prepare. Why is it not going right?
mm,
Why do I feel like somehow I forgot all of the lessons? And I had to be reminded, well, we come here and we do forget that 3D birthing experience into 3D is very memory wiping, right? So that 8D is kind of like the universal spiral schooling, because there's something about how you leave the spiral that requires a 8D experience through the spectrum of the 8D to get to the 90 to be able to perceive what's outside that window. Because to the rest of us, there's a big ass curtain in front of the window. We can't see what's outside there. We cannot. I don't care how enlightened you are. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how good your imagination is. Because trust me, I've got a wicked imagination
so do
and I
I.
cannot get there. And that's where that humble piece, that humble pie, that real true acceptance and knowing that I'm not gonna understand it, I'm not gonna get it, and it's okay that I'm frustrated by it. And if somebody wants to go to Universal High School or college, Universal College, Universal PhD, that's kind of the eighth dimension, and because it prepares the soul groups to go outside of whatever that is, whether we want to call it going back into nirvana, going to source, it doesn't matter because you have to come back down through the whole spiral to source point to go wherever the hell you're going to go, which is, I think, and this is a theory, I could be wrong. So far, I haven't had any guys on the other side go, yeah, you're smoking ganja and that ain't right. They're actually quite silent when I say this. Which is why I had the true experience one time in my life of watching a soul group leave the spiral. And it was the most amazing thing I have ever seen in my entire life because for some reason, don't ask me why, they chose to all manifest in the 3D to go leave the 3D to go through to source point to leave the
Mm.
spiral. Does that happen all the time? I have no fucking clue. I have no idea if that's a universal plan. I don't know if that's part of the rule book of the 90s spiral. I have no idea. But I got to witness that, and I will forever be so excited that I experienced it. It's like I had candy for the first time. It is like the most amazing thing to know that that is a thing. And I have no idea why, for sure, why I experienced it. I kind of think from what my guides have kind of hinted at is that I kind of needed that so that I could tell people that the 90 is a thing, because you have to come to a place to, at least I think, because I had to really let go of all ego. I had to really trust that this was something amazing, and it still took me years to conceptualize what that really meant, and I'm still not really sure I can get there. Like I admit that I'm like, I'm not sure if I really understand
Yeah.
that. But they left. They're gone.
That's so fascinating. One of my earliest spiritual teachings that I researched and read outside of Christianity was Druidry.
Yep.
And my very first Druid book had this diagram, and in the middle it has a little cauldron, and then it had concentric circles coming out of the cauldron. And in some Druid beliefs, we all come from the cosmic cauldron of source, and then
Yep.
we are born into mineral,
Yep.
plant, animal, humanoid forms, and
Yep.
can rise through these ranks or come back down and
Yep.
eventually reach a state. We can
Mhm.
be guides, etc. Like that was all implied, but we can eventually reach a state where we exit this
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
And so it's cool to see this from another angle, because
Yep.
that's so, like, I remember reading, and it was like, and eventually the choice can be made to leave or to stay and keep
Yes.
helping others in this, now we'll call it the spiral, but within the
Yes.
cauldron of creation. And
Yep.
so this, as you're describing the eighth dimension as sort of this universal school, the ninth dimension to me has become literally this it's like this giant spaceship window that's come to the edge of the universe, and you step onto this out to this window, and you see what's actually beyond the universe, and you're like, okay, now I have the map, and you completely backtrack to actually get there. That's like kind of
Yeah.
what's coming through for me. It's just,
That's
it's
a
like,
good
oh,
way to.
that
Yeah,
there it
that's a
is.
good way to. Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it. There are, and this is where it really screws people up, and I do not have a better way of explaining it, but there are entities that come into the spiral in true form in eighth dimension or ninth dimension. That's rare from what I understand. That's not a thing normally as a rule, but seventh, sixth, fifth, fourth, third, like entities that as soul groups come into the spiral in this other way, as in their true form. They come through source point, but their true form is anchored in seventh dimension, sixth dimension, eighth dimension. So the idea that we all have to be from the same true form is not a thing, but you carry your true form with you anywhere you go in the spiral. It's always somewhat available. And I think that that's the part that if you were soul group born, for lack of a better term, into an eighth dimensional entity and you're stuck here in a three-dimensional form and you're like frustrated and irritated by like like the meat suit experience and people's inability to get shit, like that's valid, and you picked it. You might not remember why you picked it, but you picked a reason to be here. So how about just be here and experience it and not feed into the fear paradigm of better than, less than, more than others. Like
Yeah.
I don't I have met some amazing work workers. I've met some amazing entities that have done a great deal of work in the world, but they themselves get stuck in the 3D trap of ego, shame, fear, and a lot of it, not a lot of it, some of it, depends on the person. They get trapped in this place of, I know I'm an 8D entity. I don't know how to explain that, but I'm this enlightened, aware, intelligent, smart entity that knows that y'all are full of shit, right? Okay, valid. And then it triggers all of the shadow, the layers of intergenerational trauma, the layers of intergenerational avoidance, racism, bias, sexism, religious persecution, wartime abuse. Pick a thing,
Right.
pick a thing, and then add more.
Yeah.
And if you are not willing to be in a humble place where you can work through that shit, you can be as enlightened as you think you want to be up here in your brain pan, and you have disconnected yourself from the experience of the 3D, you're not going to get as much work done as you think you're here to do. You can't,
Right.
because you've got to be able to carry through that 4D into the 5D. You can't just have one foot in 3D and one foot in 5D. It will not work. You will find yourself hitting the brick wall, and the proverbial bus running down the road is going to hit you.
Yeah.
And you will be that person that seeks constantly the validation of, but I'm an enlightened entity. Uh huh. And where's your work? What are you actually doing? Because universe is really wanting you to take a huge bite out of humble pie and be with the rest of us.
Yeah, it just makes me think of this conversation that we always have about hierarchy, that it doesn't really exist, that there is no ahead of
No,
or
no.
behind, and that if we're positioning ourselves in any way, shape, or form as higher than, more enlightened than, and that
Mm-hmm.
someone else is doing their thing wrong, we
Right.
we've
Wrong.
ex- we've entered us versus them, and we're trying
Yeah.
to then use spiritual bypassing to make stories up for our stuff. So yeah, I'm not about it.
Yeah.
But that is,
And
it's
it's
a very important distinction.
and it's so sad because I meet these amazing people who have like, they have real purpose,
Yeah.
and they get stuck in this very, well, first off, I'm going to apologize to all of them out into the universe forever, because in this life I'm a catalyst, and I'm going to poke that uncomfortable place by being in the room with you, and I deeply apologize, and I really 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 don't like to be that triggery. I apologize. But at the same time, I had to do this work too. I am not exempt. I have, and no story is more valid than anyone else's. Safrianna, your poetry books, like, there was one afternoon I was reading one of your poems, and I just sat here in the living room and bawling, and my poor partner's like,
What is your
this
friend doing to
empath,
you?
right? Like, he's empathic, and he's like feeling all the feels, and he finally he's like, takes his headphones off. He goes, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yes, fine, I'm fine. I'm gonna watch a YouTube video." Like, I'm trying to, like, because your experiences are valid, and it's good that it triggered something. I couldn't tell you even to today, like, what exactly it triggered, but the physical body had a visceral response, and I am falling, snot rolling out of my nose, like my face is green, like I am really in the moment, and it was good. It
Hmm.
didn't feel good at the time. My body definitely did not like it, but every journey is valid. Every healing opportunity is valid. And it's okay if you can only eat a tiny little piece of the green pea today, but tomorrow you want to eat all of the green beans off the vine. It's okay. You don't, and there is no perfect way to do it. And what works for you might not work for this other person or for me. And the light shadow journey is so vast. And spiral awareness is real. It is real. And it's also not rising to the 24th dimension and wearing a fancy foo-foo to make you get there. That is not a thing. That is not a
Not a
thing.
thing. Not a thing.
That is not a
I
thing.
like that it's 9. I am happy with that number. It's a sacred number. We like the number 9. It
Yeah.
feels more realistic and
Real.
manageable, like, especially the bridges between the dimensions.
Yes.
Like, it just doesn't make sense, like, yes, infinite, but the
So there's
ninth,
something,
whatever's beyond the ninth is the infinite.
yeah. So there's something about quantum physics that has always fascinated me. I am not a math person. Anybody who knows me knows to keep the checkbooking balance out of my hands. I am not a math person, but I get quantum physics. Don't ask me why I can get quantum physics and I cannot do basic math. I don't understand it either. There is something about those bridges that they are starting to discover. And if you look at some of the people that are doing the work, I would challenge you to look at their vibrational frequency. And I will pose the question, are these people that are discovering the quantum connections that we have with multiple layers of the universe, aka all 9 dimensions and how it manifests, are those entities not maybe those who are further along the spiral that are helping the 3D, 4D, 5D development bridge into where we're going?
Mhm.
I don't have an answer. It's just a question.
Just fun things to think about. Yeah, I mean, I think that many of us have downloads that are memories or
Yeah,
shared experiences with our guides that are being funneled through for us or whatever other number of things.
yeah,
There's so much, ultimately with this conversation, I really like the message of being humble and understanding we can't understand it all, that we
nope,
literally cannot pack it all into our
no,
brains.
mm-mm,
We do not have the circuitry for that, and that's okay,
nope, yeah.
because we're here to have a human experience. And there's so much value in having the human experience that we will continue to source through for upcoming lifetimes and
You know,
for
I think
purpose.
that one of the things I get asked all the time is like, because I do teach and because I do a lot of work with other practitioners. And one of the questions I get asked all the time, when am I going to get to where you are, Red? And I'm like, I have no answer to this question. I have truly never met anybody who is a master psychic. I've never met anybody who's a master healer. I have literally never met anybody who has reached their full potential of all of their gifts, all of their ability to connect of all of who they are between the 3D and 5D. I've never met anybody that
Yeah.
can do that. I
Yeah.
haven't, not in this meat suit. So there's so much to explore. And there's so much that we can do for each other to back to that 5D thing that everybody says they want. That 5D is we have to do it together. If you think you're going to be an isolation ego making millions of dollars doing the thing, you were headed in the wrong direction. 5D is about the connections in the community, and it is about taking all of that awareness and how do we use it in interconnection together.
We talk about all the time, the 5D is the shadow. That's what we perceive as the shadow here. And if you're not looking at that, yeah, you're not really connected to it either. Yeah.
No, you can't. And there is a deeply humbling thing that comes from listen. And I want to spiral back. Sorry, couldn't help myself. Because you said it at the very beginning. You said something about like you're in these spaces, these woo woo spaces, and they're talking about like the 11th and the 12th dimension of whatever. And I think it's fascinating to think about where that ego trip is. Like, where is the shadow that makes you think that you can use a magical necklace or whatever, or you can be positive enough to raise your vibration to the 12th dimension of whatever and where is the shadow of that? Where is that? Where is it okay to be in that much isolation, to be that alone? You see where I feel like I'm not using very many words and I'm emoting, but I know
The
you're empathic, so I'm also trying to figure out how to
yeah,
use
I'm
words.
like, I know exactly what she's talking about. Yeah, what comes through for me is this: the the more that we go through the higher dimensions, the higher numbers, like that's higher lower is literally what the numbers are, right? When we're going up, we're becoming more unified and more connected and more there's more understanding of how much and how many and one. So to claim that you're going there while you're completely isolated outside of community and not rising together, right? That's one of my like slogans is we rise together. Like that's true in this multidimensional spiral too. We have to lift each other up because of the soul group piece and the that we're here to help each other out and help other people, and not even our soul groups but just other beings, because eventually we're
Anyone.
all one again, right? My thing
Yeah.
about the breaking apart into little clusters, right? We get back to our cluster and then we're going to get back into one really big cluster eventually. It's going to be boring.
Yeah.
That's why we're here. Like this is very exciting. This
It
chaos
is very
and
exciting.
lessons and living.
There's a quality of when I've talked about the Four Sisters where every once in a while, I have a guide that is very much from the water planet, and this guide is not very vocal, doesn't come through very often. But when this guide comes through, it's all about usually calming me down so that I can sit in a space with other people with this connection piece. And it's kind of almost as though somebody's got their hands on my shoulders, like, nope, you can't get up and leave. Like, you've got to be in this space. There's something here, right? And it's usually when I'm like confused and I'm like, clearly I don't understand. So why am I even here? And this particular entity has talked frequently and often my whole life about the water planet, first off, and two, about the communal understanding of when we're thinking about evolving into 5D, that whole conversation to me is fairly new verbology because I've I'd not used that terminology prior to a couple years ago because well, first off, it wasn't a popular terminology I'd ever heard before, but my guide always talked about it about coming into the swimming pod. It was always in relation to swimming with the pods or swimming in the waters with your community where I've always been given visuals of like, how the fish, something drops in the water and all the fish go over here and all the fish go over there. And my grandma had this fish tank where it had the tiny little rainbowy, they were about that big, they were tiny little things. Yeah, like it was huge. There were so many of them in there. She's constantly selling them because they had babies like nobody's business. And my guide is very much, this particular guide is all about finding where the harmonic is, where the coherence is within the community piece. Like you're she's always been very adamant to me that it would be easy for me in a world that's patriarchal and money grubbing and hierarchical thinking to lean into that to become the expert, the top notch of the everything. Like she's always been there in the background going, don't fall into the trap.
Yeah.
That is not where you're going. You're going to swim with the pod. You should be swimming with all these people that are going in the direction. I have never had any guide ever in any of my team that has ever said, Red, you need to be at the top of the thing. If anything, they're like, and we're going to cut you off at the knees and make sure you fall down because we don't want you anywhere near that. Right? Like, so there's so much reinforcement personally, even in my guides, that connect me to the Four Sisters, that connect me to other entities and other dimensions. I don't know a world where humble isn't part of my preachiness, I guess, and experience.
Yeah, I mean we can't if we are not humble, we fall into the us versus them
Yeah,
immediately. And that's my
immediately.
soapbox that I will get on, is that us versus them is not the way to go. And that's why I
Yeah,
hope that this conversation illuminated that, we're slipping and sliding up and down the spiral. When if you're here in the human meat suit, you had the birth experience, so you got
yeah.
some memory wipes,
Well,
and it might come
there's
back.
there are walk-ins,
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so average case,
but
what?
but there is where the one-dimensional source point still matters. It doesn't matter if they're a walk-in or not. Every single meat suit experience has a source point. That's why source point is not like the bottom.
Right. Yeah,
Does that make
it's
sense?
everywhere.
It's everywhere.
It's the universal. No, that it totally makes sense to me. The 1D being that source point, because I've just called it void or God particle. Like I said, it's the point of
Right.
consciousness in which everything then stems.
Yes. I have a theory for anybody who's into cosmic quantum theory and black holes and all this other stuff. I have a question and a theory. Are dimensional portals a 2D doorway? From a
Hmm.
mathematical scientific perspective, is that where, because of the density and the electricity and the power, is that what we in 3D perceive to be dimensional doorways? I don't have an answer to this question. It is a random question, but if you're going up and down through the spiral, and we know God point is not a fixed point, and we know 2D is very similar to 1D, but it's not 3D. So is 2D the dimensional portal window? Is that what a black hole is?
I'm getting not a no at all.
Right? It's like yes and no, but that's as close as you're gonna get,
Because
right?
when we
Like,
actually think about dimensions as points,
right,
one point,
one,
flat
right?
1 point. 2D is 2 points
Yes,
affixed as a point of reference, and portals like the crossing dimensions could absolutely happen. They happen between 2 points.
yes.
So, oh my gosh, we're getting into quantum
Is this
physics. I
the
love it.
tesseract? Is the 2D the tesseract?
As the cat meows in the background, maybe. Mm.
It's very interesting. Like my guys have given me these little tidbits. Are like, yes, this is the thing, and then I'm like, yeah. And why do I have dyscalculia in this life? Like, am I just not supposed to be able to talk about it coherently to anybody with math experience? Like, I don't know.
I mean, what's funny is math never made any sense to me, but quantum mechanics, when you don't add numbers, totally makes sense to me. So
Totally makes sense.
I don't know. We're an interesting case, you and I. And I can't wait for us to one day, get more involved in politics and try to run for office, and then them come back and watch our videos from back in the day and go, wow, okay, cheese
Wow.
off cracker, right? But by that point, who knows what the world will look like. So,
Well, you got to have a little radical acceptance. You have to have a little radical authenticity in the world to make changes.
yes, we need
And
changes.
and one of the things that, I mean, you and I talked about it before. Like when the dark time happened, I'd been waiting for the dark time since I was a kiddo. I knew it was coming. Coming through that doorway of the dark time and going, oh shit, now I get to do the work. Now I really don't know what the hell it looks like. Please bring me the fishy of schools that I need to be swimming with because I don't know how to do this. And the amazing connections that continue to happen. I'm not trying. I'm not going out and doing anything extra. I'm just doing exactly what I'm here to do. And in that, having these radical connections, which you have them too, Safi. You have them too. These amazing radical connections that go, oh, yeah, I am here to do a thing. Oh, yeah, there are people here doing a thing. And yeah, to be in this world that needs the changes it needs, we have to step fully into our power. And I think that there is I'm going to go back to the spiral thing because I've heard it recently. I was listening to a podcast and I got really upset. Mostly because it's that higher dimensional, like toxic,
Mm,
hierarchical. I'm only going to be positive. I'm never going to have a bad experience. I'm going to only think this way and make radical amounts of money to go change the world to do the thing. Blah blah blah. But there's no anchoring real, like, let's have difficult conversations. Let's be
right.
uncomfortable. And there is something about those of us that know we're here to do a thing that we've had and been entrenched in these very uncomfortable situations, which have forced us to be real, authentic, messy, uncomfortable. And we know that those others that are kind of avoiding that, it's okay. You can avoid it. I'm not going to shove you. I'm not going to push you. I'm not going to make you do something you're uncomfortable with. But I am going to hold you to the radical authenticity of being uncomfortable if you want to be in the space that I'm going to be in to
Right.
change the world.
Yes.
And I'm okay with that. This is not, I'm better than you. It's when you're ready, I will open the doors and I will sit with you and I will be with you. But I'm not going to let you bypass it. And I'm
Yes.
not going to let you talk yourself out of being uncomfortable. I'm not going to let you just pretend it's not real,
Yeah.
because then we're not helping each other.
No. No. Ignoring the shadow does not help any of us, right? And again,
No,
just to reiterate one more time, if you're wanting to rise through the ranks of the spiral,
whatever.
whatever that means, you have to pass through the 5D, which is embracing the shadow. So, yes, it's all part
It's
of
the
our
realness.
story.
Yeah, it's the realness of it. Like when I talk about real, I've had people tell me this my whole life, and I'm still to this day, because I had somebody tell me this yesterday, and I still kind of went, huh? Why is this a thing? They're like, you're radically authentic. How do you live so radically authentic? And I went, well, I kind of don't know how to live any other way, so I'm confused by the statement. But then I think about like that podcast where somebody's spending so much time trying to be something before they're ready. They don't really, and this is where you get these conversations of, I'm going to wear the magical thing that I spent $500 on to raise to the 27th dimension of the whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. We want to belong, and that is in community. And to be in
Yeah.
community, we have to be able to talk about and walk in the shadows
Yes.
together because we all have them, and it's in
Yeah.
avoiding them that we don't get to rise
And
together.
we're taking our bodies with us. Stop. Please, please stop. If that's one thing I can get through, please stop thinking that to go into new earth you're going to leave you're not going to have this body, that somehow there's a fundamental flaw in the human manifestation.
I mean, the body's got some kinks that I would like to work out, but yeah, I
Of
get you.
course, of course, genetically, oh my god,
God, we're not
I
doing great.
it's like somebody like was smoking crack cocaine when they messed with the genetic code with my body. It's screwy. And I chose this body. I chose the family. I chose the genetic code. I chose all of this stuff that I am working on.
Yep.
I love my body. I live in my body. It is beautiful and perfect and exactly what I need for this life.
Yeah. And
We
that's
all need to say that. I
yes.
love my body. I live in my body. It is perfect and loving and exactly the way it is. And it needs to be for me to do my work.
Yeah. And be in this place in the spiral, right? And
Yes.
land here and expand
Yeah.
where you are here to expand, which is that
Yes.
45D
Yes.
experience and embodying and embracing all of
Mhm.
the mess that is.
Yep.
And who knows what your next journey brings, but you're here in this journey now. So can we make
Now.
the most of it and, make it better for
Yeah.
everyone involved? Like,
Yeah.
so if you have follow-up questions from this, as always, please feel free to let us know. Um, what's coming through for me is actually to do something for the winter solstice for our next live because
Yeah.
it's falling on December 20th. And I'm really feeling this year more than ever that we need to embrace this hibernation time and go into the stillness and the shadow and within and like drop deep. So I'd love to explore that with you, Red. But if you all have
Yeah.
other questions, we are always keeping, I always have my little list of topics that we're covering in the future running. It's literally right here. It gets put on my notebook every week. So let us know. We're so happy to be here to share space with you. And again, our thoughts, opinions, and downloads.
Yes. And the spiral is this very hot topic. So if something doesn't jive or it doesn't line up, kind of like I've said throughout the show, my guides give me tidbits all the time, and it is truly challenging with some of the 7, 8, 9D to make that make sense because we can't really get there.
My sense, as I just even used my gifts to try to go there, it was so vast and unlike here that it
Oh yeah,
was just fractals and light and nothing made any sense. I was like, "Okay, cool. I don't need to go there right now. That's
no,
not for me
no.
right
But there's
now."
a lot happening in 6D, and I've actually heard some very interesting like people that thought they were talking about like 12th dimension and 24th dimension. They're totally talking about the sixth dimension,
I
and
have
I'm sitting
I
there
have friends I'm
giggling,
thinking
right?
of that talk about that all the time and like
Yeah,
their information is so good. Like I'm like right on board
yeah,
except for the dimensions. That doesn't land quite right for me, but that's
yeah,
okay because I know
yeah,
that there's truth to I, and
yeah.
again, none of us can really pinpoint where it's happening because we can't do that here in this meat suit. So it's whatever.
Well, I think the cool thing about 60 is that because it is 60, they can travel between these interesting points. I think that are to the wormhole dimensional thingies. I don't wormholey dimensional go into another universe. I'm not real sure how to explain that, but I think that's where that 60 gets so messy. That
Mhm.
they are picking up 60 things, 100%, but because we're just not there yet, it seems like it's this other thing. And
Vast thing,
and
yeah.
it's where magic happens for real, for lack of a better way of describing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much I could talk about there too, but
Maybe we should do a show just on 6D in the future because there's
maybe
stuff. There's
6D.
stuff.
I mean, the galactic warfare, spiritual warfare stuff is so like there's so much there and there's so much fear in it and so I'd love to dust that stuff away
Yeah.
and
And
get us all
it's
flowing again.
it's not here. So why are you obsessing about it?
Yeah. And for some of us, we're potentially doing work or our guides are doing like yeah, we
Yeah,
need
I
to do a
mean,
whole episode on this.
we should probably do a whole episode on it
It's
because
written down now.
it's
Messy.
it's not people get caught in that fear paradigm here, and boy, that spins them into a place where they just get sticky and stuck like you've got bubble gum underneath your shoe and you cannot get unstuck. And I
Yeah.
just want to pry it up and go, okay, let's just be authentically real with it. Let's be with all the emotions and all the feelings because some of it is legit, but let's not make it something it's not. And let's not spread that fear everywhere. Please, please, we have work to do. Let's
Yeah.
do the work.
And as somebody who's a fear person, I get it and we can so navigate it differently, my friends. We really, really
Yeah,
can.
yeah, we
So,
can.
until next time, we'll be back in 2 weeks. We'll talk about the solstice and probably, who knows, maybe we'll work some energy. And then we will talk in the future about a variety of other things. You know where to find us. So don't
Yeah,
hesitate to reach out if you need us. Otherwise, know that we love you. We care about you. We're
always.
cheering you on. And we respect your sovereignty as an individual. Very important.
100%. 100%.
All right. Bye
Have a
for now,
blessed
friends.
day. Bye bye.